Debunking Zero Waste Asia. So, so we also take this opportunity to thank staff of CAP and SAM who have helped in organizing the symposium. Okay. And how it is managed, or a lot of times it's mismanaged. Yeah? As communities worldwide grapple with the escalating challenges of waste management, plastics pollution, and environmental degradation, so the International Zero Waste Month 2024 offers practical solutions to the escalating waste and plastics crisis. And it also confronts false solutions to the crisis, such as waste to energy incineration and plastics credit and offset. So the other day we had a meeting and people were like, really? Is there such a thing as plastics credit? Because we often hear of carbon credits, so now it's plastics credit. There were also, we also hear of biodiversity credits. So a lot of these terms have been coined up, yeah? But a lot of it is, everything is like false solutions. So in Asia, generally waste incineration is, because it's such a bad word, incineration is a bad word here, so they refer it as waste to energy facilities. Yeah? This is a deception. Yeah? Not only do they claim to make waste disappear, they also claim to produce energy during the process. It could produce energy, but then our waste is highly inefficient fuel. Yeah? So due to the low calorie value of waste, incinerators are only able to generate small amounts of energy while destroying large amounts of reusable materials. So a detailed analysis shows that incinerators waste more energy than they produce, primarily because what is incinerated has to be replaced with new products. Yeah? So in short, incinerators are a massive waste of energy. Gaia has a lot of publications on this matter, which is out there. You can pick up some of those publications. So the objective of this symposium is to gather situational analysis and also updated knowledge on waste to energy incineration from key Asia-Pacific countries. We have speakers from Indonesia, Philippines, China, Japan, Australia, and also Zero Waste Europe to share their experiences. Some of them are here in person and some will join us online. So they will deliberate on how waste to energy incineration fails both as a waste and resource management option, and also it is not a clean energy generating facility. Yes. What do we expect to do after this symposium? We will prepare a policy paper based on the presentations from the symposium and submit to the relevant authorities as part of our advocacy campaign to debunk false solutions. We cannot keep on fighting each project that is coming up. It is the policy that we need to reform. And Yuan Mei will later share with you the many proposals of WTE in Malaysia. Okay? So besides the waste to energy plants for processing municipal solid waste, we also have many incinerators built in situ of paper waste and plastic waste recycling plants. In Selangor itself, there are a number of them proposed in the Kuala Langat industrial area, where there are a lot of paper waste recycling plants, and these are close to communities and some schools. And also recently the EIA for a proposed incinerator plant in WTE, in a paper waste recycling plant in Bentong, was approved. So we foresee so many more proposals due to the setting up of recycling plants, and also the influx of imported plastic and paper waste for recycling, and our government's policy. So for instance, Malaysia's National Energy Transition Master Plan, it identifies municipal solid waste as a source of bioenergy, besides the biomass, and they say it has the potential to serve as feedstock for power generation. And as I mentioned just now, they think of it as renewable energy. What we would debunk is WTE is not renewable. It is not part of the circular economy. It is not clean. It is not green energy. In response to these false solutions, we also have zero waste. Zero waste emerges as a science-based solution, advocating for departure from harmful waste management technologies. So Gaia was formed in 2000. So even previously we had been talking about zero waste. We have been sharing with the Malaysian government in terms of Zero Waste Australia, Zero Waste New Zealand strategies. At that time, they were laughing at us. It's not. What are you talking about? It's not possible. But then now it has become really the keyword, yeah, in terms of waste management. And so later on, Mr. Fräulein will be telling us more about how zero waste is possible. Yeah. So I will not preempt the keynote addresses on zero waste. You will learn how zero waste is not just a concept. Previously, it was an idea and all that. It's not a concept. It is possible. It is being implemented. Yeah, even in Penang, in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia. You can also see the exhibition there. Zero Waste Malaysia is very active. Yeah, and so this symposium provides a valuable opportunity for us all to share our experiences and advocate reforms in our own communities, the government, the businesses, the industry, and also the waste management sector. Yeah? So please visit the exhibition during the breaks. We do have some long breaks so that you can mingle around with the exhibitors, yeah, and learn about their issues. And it is really very eye-opening and will inspire change in you. Yeah? We do not provide water bottles here. Yeah, so we hope everyone brought your own water. Yes. Yes, you have your own water bottles, that's good. We will be providing lunch, there will be plates, but if you have your own containers, use your own containers and your utensils. Okay, so wishing you all a successful symposium, and we are around if there's any issues or any problems, you can come to us, the Secretariat. Yeah, and there's Azrul and Trisha who is helping us for the online sessions. Thank you very much. We are inviting Yuan Mei to tell us more about the symposium, yeah? How it's been.
Good morning to our distinguished guests, to the community members from Rawang, from Batu Arang, Bandar Tasik Puteri, Jeram, Kuala Selangor. Welcome all of you. So first, why did we set the theme debunking waste to energy incineration for Malaysia at the dawn of 2024? The reason being, on 14 December 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Resolution 77-161, entitled Promoting Zero Waste Initiative to Advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, at its 77th session, to proclaim 30th of March as International Day of Zero Waste, for making fundamental changes in how society produce and consume goods and services, addressing the root causes for ending the waste crisis. The International Day of Zero Waste aims to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns, support the society shift towards circularity, and raise awareness about how zero waste initiatives contribute to advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Under General Assembly Resolution 77/161, the President of the General Assembly, in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Programme and UN Habitat, convened a high-level meeting on the role of zero waste as a transformative solution in achieving the SDGs on Thursday, 30th March 2023, last year, in New York, the USA. As a Malaysia delegate, Mr. Sofian Akmal Abdul Karim, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the United Nations, reiterated that Malaysia's commitment to embracing the circular economy model in the National Development Plan 12 Malaysia Plan 2021 to 2025 and Malaysia's Cleanliness Policy 2019, in which Malaysia's solid waste management will be strengthened to ensure compliance with existing standards set by the local, state and federal governments. Waste will be managed holistically and sustained by intensifying the reduce, reuse and recycle initiative. Domestic facilities for waste separation and recycling will be improved to support support the initiative, particularly in residential, institutional, and commercial areas. Prior to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 77/161, the European Union withdrew financial support to the construction of waste-to-energy incineration due to carbon dioxide emissions problems, which contribute to the climate crisis globally. So, in 2017, the European Union called for a ban on investment in waste-to-energy, and tax changes in the European Union removed public support for waste-to-energy investment. In 2018, the Sustainable Finance Investment Guide for European Investment Bank excluded waste-to-energy as an acceptable investment. In 2019, the European Green Deal, established by the European Commission, requires waste reduction, increasing the level of higher recycling and preserving the right to repair. In 2020, the European Union Taxonomy Regulations 2020 removed incinerators, including waste-to-energy incineration, from the definition of environmentally sustainable and denied incineration as a critical economic activity. The European Environmental Bureau Climate Action Plan adopts a new circular economy action plan and calls for the end of waste-to-energy by 2040. In 2022, the European Parliament included municipal incinerators in the scope of the EU emissions trading scheme, which sets a price for carbon dioxide emission from municipal waste incinerations until 2026. So with that, what objective we try to achieve here today? We hope the sharing of updated situational analysis of waste-to-energy incineration in the Asia-Pacific and Europe through the international speakers that we have invited to present at this symposium can inform us some lessons learned and also the way forward to inform the waste management in Malaysia in terms of laws, policies, and projects is going towards a just zero waste future. With that, I thank you for your support. I'm very happy to see everyone here who commit to the cause. Thank you. A just zero waste future. Thank you. And now, we have the honor and the pleasure to have the Minister of the European Union delegation to Malaysia. Oh, so I'm sorry, my apologies. But I would like to invite, yes, Mr. Florent Gate, the Director of the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternative Asia Pacific Office, to deliver his keynote address. Mr. Florent. Thank you. Mr. Florent came from Manila all the way yesterday. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone in the room. National Zero Waste Month. Today, we join thousands of civil society organizations, grassroots groups, youth organizations, local governments, small businesses, and everyone celebrating real solutions and local actions to address the problem of waste, plastic pollution, climate change, waste colonialism, and other forms of environmental injustice. With more than 300 events planned for the month, there's probably one in your city or in your country. If not, we invite you to organize your own events and join this global movement as we go for zero waste and break free from plastic. You may visit zerowaste.asia to learn more or to add your own events. Last January 6, we started this month-long celebration with the Refuse Single-Use Day to highlight one of the major barriers to achieving real zero waste. our economic system that promotes single use and disposability. I refuse to call it a culture of single use. For many of us in Asia, we grew up in a culture of reuse and zero waste. In the Philippines, many of our dishes are born out of creativity of finding ways of utilizing every part of a plant or an animal, so as nothing would go to waste. Many of our traditional markets have been, in some places still are, or are returning to a system of reuse or abusing indigenous materials or packaging. Without revealing our age, many of us are still remember growing up bringing our own containers to buy basic household items like cooking oil, soy sauce, or vinegar in our community stores. But somewhere along the way, this false narrative of convenience and hygiene gave way to a culture of sachets and everything that's packed with plastic. Over the past 8 years, we have been made aware of the dangers and negative impact of plastic on our lives, not just with the common picture we see of turtles or other sea animals entangled in plastic, but realizing that plastics are killing people and the planet from the very moment that they are extracted from the ground, to harming our health when we are using them with all the toxics embedded in them, and are still harming our health in our communities when they are being managed via false solutions like waste to energy and dirty recycling. Aside from these obvious harms, I hope those harms are obvious, plastic is an ongoing environmental social justice problem, as the cost of managing plastic and in this regard waste generally has been externalized to cities and communities and away from those who are truly accountable for their production and use. Many cities in Asia are left with choosing between using limited public money to providing social services for people or managing waste, mostly plastic, that's being dumped on us. But we all know these problems. Many of us live it every day. And most unfortunate, these exact problems are being used to justify the push for end-of-life false solutions. And if those promoting waste to energy would get their way, many communities would have to face the negative impact of these false solutions on their health, on their livelihood, and in the environment for the years to come. The second week of the International Zero Waste Month focused on real solutions like composting, reuse, and zero waste cities and communities, with the goal of putting a spotlight on current working solutions already being implemented by many communities across Asia and around the world. This week, we are putting a spotlight on false solutions being promoted to address the problem of waste. And today's symposium on debunking the myths around waste-to-energy incineration in Malaysia is very timely and relevant. While you may be facing this issue urgently here, you are not alone. Many communities around the region are grappling with the same problem. We have to make sure that we are asking the right questions to ensure we get the right answers. When we ask questions like, what do we do with our waste? Or where should our waste go? Or how do we reduce the volume of waste already in our landfill? We have already lost the battle. These questions would lead us to false solutions that may make us feel like we're addressing the problem, but in reality, we're only perpetuating the very system that created the problem in the first place. Today, I would like to invite everyone to reflect on a better question. How can we create a system that allows all of us to use the resources that we need without damaging the earth and its capacity to sustain not only us, but future generations? How can we create a system where nothing and no one is disposable? No community is a throwaway community. And how can we ensure that this system put most of the burden to those most responsible, especially to those who are profiteering the most out of this system? This is where zero waste comes in. Zero waste is the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning and with no discharges to land, water, or air. And that last element is important. Because when we build incinerators or waste to energy, what we're trying to say is that we don't want a landfill where we can see the waste. Rather, we want the waste to be in the air so that we can breathe it every day. Zero waste is a goal that is ethical, economical, efficient, and visionary to guide people in changing their lifestyles and practices, to emulate sustainable natural cycles, where all discarded materials are designed to become resources for others to use. Zero waste means designing and managing products and processes to systematically avoid and eliminate the volume and toxicity of waste and materials, conserve and recover all resources, and not burn or bury them. Implementing zero waste will eliminate all discharges to land, water, or air that are a threat to planetary, human, and animal health. Now you might be asking, is zero waste truly possible? It is important to note that zero waste is both a goal and a plan of action. It is the destination, but equally important, it is the journey that we take. It is the future that we want, but also the actions that we take today. And in this regard, zero waste is not only possible, it is already happening. We are all familiar with the story of San Francisco or Berkeley in California. In Europe, more than 450 cities and municipalities have committed to work on zero waste. But when it comes to zero waste, we are proud to say Asia is home of solutions. And for good reasons. Many cities and communities in Indonesia and the Philippines have proven it works and have been reaping the benefits for several years now. Cities like San Fernando and Pampanga in the Philippines have realized waste diversion of 56% when they implemented citywide zero waste program from a low of 13% in a span of 6 months, only 6 months. These allowed them to close a pilot waste-to-energy facility in the city. Why? After 2 years of the pilot waste-to-energy program, you are faced with a question. Is it still logical to invest millions of public funds in something that is supposed to address their waste when a better solution is working? Now that they have reduced their waste, where would they get the waste that the facility would need? Would they now start importing waste from other cities just to sustain this facility? The city has come to realize that a waste-to-energy facility, even if it works, because in the context it hasn't worked after a 2-year pilot period, is not compatible with zero waste. Now, after more than 10 years of implementing zero waste, the city has achieved 86% waste diversion, the highest in the Philippines and probably in Asia, and among the highest in the world. That means that 86% of their waste is no longer ending up in landfills and is instead managed within their communities via composting, recycling, and upstream policies that eliminate or prevent waste in the first place. These include policies like strong plastic and polystyrene bans and promotion of reuse and refill systems. These allowed the city to realize massive savings in public funds previously allocated for waste management. This also allowed them to generate local green jobs, tapping waste pickers now to be waste workers with better working conditions and higher income. And we don't have to go far. Here in Malaysia, we have examples of communities taking the lead in Penang. I invite you to talk to Magas at Consumer Association of Penang to know more about these stories, or to Zero Waste Malaysia and other exhibitors outside in our Zero Waste Marketplace for other efforts here in Malaysia. I hope today is a start of meaningful conversations between all of you in this room. We may not have all the answers today, but I hope we start with the right questions. And I would like to end by sharing a few questions of my own. For all our local officials and policymakers in the room, does it make sense to invest limited public money in solutions that aren't sustainable, especially when local, low-cost, sustainable solutions exist? For all our community leaders, how can we ensure that our voices are heard? How can we ensure that those truly responsible for pollution are held accountable? Until when should we tolerate their excuse of using us as excuse for continued use of problematic products and packaging in the guise of consumer demand and convenience? Until when do we allow them to externalize the cost of producing their products and packaging at the expense of our communities? And to all of us, in the age of climate emergency and in the context of our limited planetary resource, does it really make sense to burn resources and deprive the future generation of their use? Is it just? Is it fair? Or at the very least, does it even make sense? Let's prove to the world that common sense isn't dead. When choosing between a false solution like waste to energy that harms people and the planet, or zero waste, I hope the answer is easy. Let's all say no to false solutions, and together, let's go for zero waste and break free from plastic. Happy International Zero Waste, everyone. Everyone, terima kasih banyak. Thank you.
Of the EU delegation to Malaysia in September 2021, not long ago. He has previously
meet you and learn about this very important topic. It's a little bit scary because you have actually mentioned quite a lot of elements about the Green Deal, the specific elements about the EU Green Deal that are most relevant to the topic, which is great. So I will concentrate on zooming out a little bit and provide a little bit of broader context with regard to the European Green Deal. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to meet you all this morning. And you have talked a lot about my background, and you have mentioned that I have worked as a diplomat in Ecuador. So let me share one of my first experiences when I came to Ecuador many years ago. There is a provision in the Ecuadorian constitution that says that it's not allowed to contact the so-called uncontacted peoples in the Amazon tropical rainforest. There's a number of communities of ethnic groups in the Amazon tropical rainforest that don't have any contact to the rest of the population in Ecuador, and it's a constitutional right that they have the right to live in peace and to live in their traditional ways. And in this context, I stumbled across a report from, I think it was National Geographic. They were allowed to use some kind of drones and take pictures of these communities that have never been in touch with what we call the so-called civilization. And there was one picture that really stuck out to me and that is unforgotten to me until today. In one of the communities, they saw the drone, they brought out spares, and they were throwing spares at the drones because they had no idea what this is, and they were rightfully scared of the drones. And this is touching and impressive in itself. But when I looked at the spare, I could not believe my eyes. In this community that has never been contacted by so-called civilization, the river has brought a can of Coca-Cola to them. And this red Coca-Cola can, they had no idea what this is, they could not relate, and they used it as a part of the spare. As a part of the spare, in the middle, there was a can of Coca-Cola. So our waste is where nobody of us is actually allowed to go. It's a constitutional right of them to live in peace. We are not allowed to go where their communities are, but our trash is already there. So this, I know it's a bad habit of diplomats to chat about their own past, but this came to my mind, Fräulein, when I was listening to your presentation, so I just wanted to share this. With regard to the broader topic, I will not go into details of the European Green Deal because it is a world in itself. It is more of a one-day symposium in itself, because some elements of the Green Deal with regard to waste to energy have been mentioned. For example, the broader context of the circular economy action plan. Most talked about here in Malaysia is, of course, EUDR, the EU regulation for deforestation-free products. Other things like the so-called CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanisms, are also starting to get known. But these are 2-3 isolated elements. The EU Green Deal is 165 pieces of legislation. So these are 3 examples out of 165. It is a very broad framework. It's a very ambitious set of legislation that comes from one basic assumption. The basic idea of the European Green Deal is that we have been talking about combating climate change for more than a generation, and we have been talking, and we have done commitments, we have done action plans, we have pledged, but all of this is good intentions, and all of this is helpful to change the mindset in society, which is a very important first step. But if you really want to have an impact, you need legislation, you need regulation. Without regulation, it's not very likely that our ambitious yet necessary goals can be achieved. And we have all pledged in one way or another to climate neutrality by 2050. Of course, it's very convenient. We can pledge 2050 is very far away. If I'm a decision maker in 2024, I can say it's still a generation ahead. I have to take care of the very pressing, important political issues today. But all the statistics show that we are not in track to climate neutrality. And if we do what we have been doing for the past decades, talk, but not much action, it is not likely to change. So the European Union has made this decision in 2019 to go for an ambitious set of measures, and so far, from the 165 legislative initiatives that have been drafted, 58 are adopted, a further 18 are sort of adopted. There's a political agreement, but it's not into place yet. So 46% of the legislative package is done. 39 concrete proposals are on the table, and another 42 are announced. 4 have been discarded on the way. So this is a pure statistic, just to show you that it's very comprehensive. What is also important about the Green Deal is that it's quite innovative in many ways. The EU is a front runner in some of these issues, which in some circles makes the EU maybe popular. In many other circles it makes the EU very unpopular, because we also had to learn, and you were asking for lessons learned. Of course, once you start legislating, there is a cost and there is a price. And it is, of course, a very popular story to say that our transition brings economic opportunities, and of course it is very true. And there is an economic case in this kind of transition. But there is also a price, and this kind of price can cause a backlash. This is also what is happening in some parts of Europe. It is common knowledge that the Green Deal is not popular everywhere in Europe. There is resistance against some parts of the Green Deal. So it is very important to communicate these measures. But right now, the European Union has managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions measured by 1990 levels by 31%. So the 55% target by 2030 seems reachable. It seems very likely that the EU, according to statistics, will reach this target. And at the same time, for the first time ever in 2023 in the EU, we generated more electricity from wind and solar sources than from gas. Of course, this is also due to geopolitical circumstances, but it is an achievement. And also the number of clean steel factories since 2019 has grown from 0 to 38 in 5 years or 4 years and a bit. The investment in hydrogen in the European Union is higher than in China and US combined. And only in the last year, 2023, the newest estimates show that we managed to decrease around 2.5% the greenhouse emissions only last year. So with this, I would like to turn very briefly to the Circular Economy Action Plan, because this brings us to what you have mentioned. Very briefly, 3 examples what this can mean in practice. I want to mention the examples of clothing, of electricity, and of manufacturing and batteries. For example, in terms of clothing, there is now, due to the fact that every European citizen has produced, even in 2023, 12 kilo waste per person with regard to clothing, an average statistical total. So there are new rules for extended producer responsibility for textiles, holding producers accountable for the entire life cycle of clothes for the first time. Turning to electrical and electronic equipment, also in this case, the numbers, the statistics with regard to e-waste, 11 kilo per average European, are absolutely amazing. One of the legislative measures of the Green Deal is to force companies to simplify and unify chargers for mobile phones. So in the EU, it doesn't matter what kind of phone you have, it doesn't matter what the company is. We force the companies to use the same chargers. You can use the same chargers for Apple or Android or whatever you're using as another concrete element on how to reduce waste. A third example that I would like to touch upon, which is very sensitive, of course, in times of food crisis in many parts of the world, because of inflation, because of fertilizer inflation, because of rising food prices. It is very shameful that in the European Union we are wasting food in an incredible dimension. 131 kilos per person per European citizen, which is absolutely shameful. So there is now legally binding food waste reduction targets to be achieved by 2030. Each EU member state is required to reduce food waste by 10% in the part of processing and manufacturing, and by 30% in retail and consumption. So all of these tiny examples, I said in total 165 pieces of legislation, but I think you get the main message. The main message is we have been talking for a generation. We've been doing great declarations, we have been doing pledges and so on, but in order to make a real change, we have to go to regulation and come up with new ways to also transform this change into economic opportunities on the one hand, but also in the change of mindset. I grew up in Germany, as you know, and in the Germany of the 1980s, when I was brought to school or to tennis practice by my parents, it was the most normal thing in the world that they would smoke inside the car and throw out the cigarette on the street, drink a bottle of water, throw it out to the street. In the 1980s in Germany, this was absolutely normal. Nowadays, if you do that, you get a very significant fine. And not only that, it's also, if your neighbors see that you're throwing out trash out of the window or something like that, you will also get in trouble with your neighbors. So with the change of mindset, climate change in Europe is an issue that can decide elections. It's not like one topic that you talk about for a couple of minutes as a formality. Climate change is a topic that can decide elections. It's politically highly sensitive. So it is in the middle of the society. So as a very important part of our climate diplomacy, we have excellent relations with the Malaysian government. We have very high-level visitors next week from DG Environment, in March from DG Climate. Our experts are coming to Malaysia to discuss what Malaysia and the EU can do together to strengthen our endeavors to jointly work towards net zero, zero waste, and prevent humankind from what we would never do to our children. There was a journalist who wrote about the way we treat our Earth and compared it to asking your children to get into a bus, but we know that 3 out of the 4 tires of the bus are just about to explode. We know the bus will not be sustainable, the bus will break down any time. And at the moment we're doing exactly that. We're putting our children, our next generation, into a bus, and while we are looking at the tires of this bus are degenerating. So it's very important to work together. To work together is the only way. No country alone, Malaysia alone, I think is responsible for 0.6% of the emissions worldwide, if I'm correctly informed. So of course we can all say it does not have a big impact what we're doing here, but the collaborative efforts on a global scale are absolutely important. So thank you so much for listening to me this morning. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to say a few words about the European Green Deal. And I wish you a very fruitful day of discussions, and hope you will come up with some good ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. 23 years ago, 2020, the Malaysian government talked about incineration, and the first largest incinerator was proposed in Broga, Semenyih, where near my hometown, where I came from. In Kampung Boho, Puchong, and then relocated to Broga, Semenyih. There was at the time, European Union had policies to phase out landfills, replaced by incinerators. This year, 2023, we have to have a new future. We have to have a paradigm shift. The European Union learned their lessons, and they now wanted to phase out incinerator since 2017 in their policies and legislations. Thank you, Mr. Guzman, for sharing that to change, to have a better future, we all are required to change our behavior. We all are required to change our mindset. And we are all here required to have new legislation, new laws to ensure we are heading to a better future, phasing out WTE incinerators. And with that, we will start our first panel. We will invite Mr. Brex. Arbanor is a climate and environmental justice advocate with over 5 years of experience working with youth, civil society, and faith-based organizations. He currently works as the climate and anti-incineration campaigner of the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternative Asia Pacific Office. So with that, I will first invite Mr. Brex. Thank you.
Let me just put my zero waste mug over there. All right. So good morning to everyone. Again, Brex Arevalo here, and it's been great to hear from Mr. Guzman, Froy, May, Magesh. Very delighted to have such a good mix of audience members here. I'm Brex Arevalo again, and have some technical difficulties. And today I'll be presenting about the challenges of incineration, waste energy incineration, and viable alternatives for zero waste solutions in a developing country context. So this presentation will be going through different questions. What is waste energy, WTE, and what are its main drivers? Is WTE a viable solution to pollution? Is energy from WTE renewable? And you may have already heard earlier, what are viable alternatives to WTE? Next, please. Why is this relevant to us? Some of you may know and already feel this much more than I do. It affects land use, ecosystem health, human health, livelihoods, public money. Right now there's the international topic of climate finance. It involves the ongoing energy transition that's happening throughout Asia Pacific. This is number 4 is referring to emerging legislation in Southeast Asia in order to enable waste energy incineration. Next, please. Types of WTE. So, sorry. When we talk about waste to energy, we are referring to waste to energy plants. And these are plants that process discards or waste into energy in the form of heat or electricity. Now there are 2 types of WTE. The first one is biological waste energy, such as what happens in biodigesters or anaerobic digesters. And the second, which is our focus for today, is referring to thermal waste energy. This involves incinerators, gasifiers, pyrolysis, plasma arc. And in the next slide, you'll see over there a little linguistic detoxification. Basically, these are different terms that are used for WTE or trash incineration. You might hear resource recovery, energy from waste, conversion technologies, pyrolysis, gasification, plasma arc. And we are also mentioning over here biomass because of how biomass needs to be incinerated. Next, please. This is a global snapshot of incinerators in the world. Globally, there are about 368 million tons of collected municipal solid waste that are incinerated each year from over 2,000 facilities. In Asia Pacific, you have about 200 emerging right now, particularly in countries like China, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Maldives, and Vietnam. And all of these are, most, if not all, are being disputed by communities and scientists because of their adverse environmental and social harms. Next, please. This is a sort of a textbook image of what happens in an incinerator facility. So if you look at box number 1 over there, the furnace, that's where the waste is lodged into the facility. In box number 2, it goes through different air pollution control devices. Now, you may hear a lot of WTE proponents say that their air pollution control measures are good and that they in fact filter out a lot of the emissions. But as will be discussed later by Dr. Jorge, even if you have some filtered emissions, there are still emissions. There are still toxics that go into the air. And box number 3, that shows where after the waste is incinerated, it becomes ash, particularly toxic ash, hazardous ash, that eventually must go into a landfill. And I think that's in the next slide. So where does the ash go? Into costly landfills for hazardous waste. Please take note that when you have ash, toxic ash, this needs to be processed, this needs to be treated in a very particular way. You cannot mix toxic ash into regular landfills. It has to be separated into a toxic ash landfill. So this was what I was referring to earlier. Even if you have some sort of air emission controls, some of it is still becomes toxics. Next, please. Now this is a picture of a landfill in Singapore, their only landfill, if I'm not mistaken. This is in Semakau, and the picture on the left is an offshore landfill. So I believe what happened was they artificially conjoined 2 islands together to form that big mass. And on the right there is a picture inside the landfill where a truck is disposing of the ash, of the toxic ash. Now, I might have a slide on it later, but I believe what's happening here is that in Singapore, because they are very reliant on incinerators at the moment, they do recognize that they need more landfills. So this is one landfill, and in the next few decades you're going to see a lot more landfills, and the question then becomes, where do we put these landfills? Next please. This is a picture in Cameron Highlands, that's somewhere in Malaysia. Somewhere in Malaysia. This, I think, was taken by one of our Gaia members from Kidney TV. This is an incinerator there. This was around 2015 or 2017, which was placed in a community. And the community was complaining about black smoke being emitted from the incinerator. Alongside that, it's not here in this slide, but in this video over here, there are community members complaining that the toxic ash landfills, which are right next to their residences, are open landfills. So, for instance, if there's air that blows through, the ash will go into the air, go into the soil, and that's what they breathe in and breathe out. Next, please. There's another one. This is an example of an open landfill. This is in the Covanta Toxic Ash Landfill in Massachusetts in the USA. there's an ongoing protest around this right now. You'll see over here that there's there's a lot of smoke from the toxic ash. Next, please. This is not Disneyland, although it looks like it. This is in Maishima. This is the Maishima incinerator plant in Osaka in Japan. And I'm putting this picture over here particularly because, well, Japan is one of the largest proponents of incinerators. And the narrative in Japan is that it is a clean energy. And they actually have tours here. They give tours to the public where they can go inside the incinerator plant, they can visit it. Next, please. So, we have two types of incineration that we're talking about. We already went through the first part, combustion, pyrolysis, gasification. We're gonna mention a little bit in the next few slides about co-incineration. This involves things like refuse-derived fuel, solid recovered fuel, process-engineered fuel, and this is essentially the burning of waste in cement kilns or industrial boilers or coal plants by first converting it into different forms. In the next slide, you'll see pictures there. Next, please. Is anyone here familiar with RDF, with those little pellets?
Yes.
So they're usually converted into those forms and used as fuel. So in coal plants, in cement kilns, for instance. And what happens here is that if you remember the energy transition happening across Asia Pacific that's happening right now, there is the move to retire coal-fired power plants. But one of the controversies is that RDF is being used as a means to so-called lessen the reliance on coal. So for instance, a company might say, we're using less coal now because we're using RDF. But RDF essentially does involve incineration, and it does still emit GHG. Next, please. Those are pictures there of large-scale RDF plants. It's simply reprocessed waste. Next, please. Now, and how much time do I have? There are 3 points that I'd like to make in the next few slides, 3 main ones. In showing why WTE incineration is not a solution, it's a false solution, and is part of the waste problem. The first is that it's a terrible it's a terrible source of energy and for the climate because of its carbon intensity. Number 2, it's extremely toxic to human health. And number 3, it's an expensive and inefficient technology in dealing with waste. So, in the first point, studies show that WTE is a major source of GHG emissions. In fact, they emit more greenhouse gases per unit of energy than coal plants. In the next slide, I think it shows the comparison of, no, not yet this one. Okay, go back. Maybe in another slide. I'll go back, please. So over there on the right, you'll see a little graph there. I don't know if you can read it, but it shows the emissions that happen in different scenarios. Recycling, you lessen your emissions. In landfill, that's the total. Incineration, that is the comparison. Next, please. The second point is that WTE is toxic to human health. I don't know if there are any chemists here or people in the science field, but these are the lists of different toxics and hazardous substances that are released by waste-to-energy incinerators. In the next slide, you'll see over there, In the next slide, you'll see over there how they compare to coal. So, toxic air emissions, they release 28 times as much dioxins and furans, which we will go through in a bit, or persistent organic pollutants, as coal, 6 to 14 times as much mercury, 6 times as much lead, 3.2 times as much nitrogen oxides, 1.9 times as much carbon monoxide, 20% worse sulfur dioxide, and 2.5 times as much carbon dioxide or CO2. Next, please. Now, one of the most known toxic chemicals, toxic substances that WT emits are persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, particularly dioxins and furans. Now, this is dioxins and furans are regulated internationally by the international agreement called the Stockholm Convention on POPs, or Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. These are recognized by the WHO as causing reproductive and developmental problems. For instance, when you were a child, when you were an infant, damage to the immune system, interference with hormone levels, and causing cancer. Next, please. Now, the way that dioxins work is that they accumulate in fat tissues, and you can get them across the food chain. So, for instance, let's say a cow consumes dioxin-contaminated grass. This can transfer onto humans. And the way that they work is that they accumulate and then they accumulate, and that their effects on the body are not immediately seen. It may take a few years, but they will make themselves known. I think there's something over there that says that, yes, it's something about the fetus, where because they steadily accumulate in the body, the highest dose of dioxins go to fetuses. Next, please. Now, this is a picture of France. I don't know if you heard the news. This was sometime last year, where what happened was there were researchers who tested the levels of dioxins in eggs. So dioxins accumulated in eggs in a certain area in France, and they reported this to the government, and the government made their own study, which validated the previous one. And so what happened was there was a government announcement that basically said we highly discourage residents to consume eggs that come from this area, that yellow area in the map. Next, please. That something happens in other areas too, across Asia, like China. And another thing about the facilities is, and particularly about dioxins, is when you have a facility, when a WTE facility, that needs cleanup. And when you clean up, you have to restart the whole facility. And studies show that during the restarting phase of a facility, you emit up to 6 years worth of dioxins compared to normal operations. And another note here is that usually when some governments say they are reporting dioxins or they are monitoring dioxins, usually that's not 24/7. So they may be monitoring only at certain periods, and they may not be monitoring during these periods when most of the emissions, when most of the dioxins actually get released. Next, please. Now, this is our third point. WTE is expensive and inefficient. I think this was mentioned already earlier by Fräulein. And this is a comparison across different energy sources. Over there in red is incineration. Above it is nuclear. Above that is coal. and the rest are renewable sources of energy, except for natural gas. And maybe disputedly geothermal, but that's another discussion. Next, please. Now, WTE is expensive and inefficient because its energy efficiency rate is 20 to 30% at best. In Southeast Asia, most of the waste and the waste profile across different countries in Southeast Asia, most of that is organic waste, wet waste. And when you have wet waste, and the differences between wet waste and dry waste is that dry waste essentially produces more energy and is more efficient compared to wet waste. So in the Southeast Asian context, because you have such a high moisture content in the waste profile, WTE ends up as not an efficient source of energy. Next, please. This is a comparison of different waste, of the waste composition in different countries in Southeast Asia. This was from a study in 2020. Organics make up that bottom blue part across all of those countries, followed by the orange is paper, then plastic, glass, metal, and others. Next, please. And as mentioned earlier, WTE is also a form of wasted energy. When you burn products, you essentially reduce or you kill off their usefulness their usefulness as a product, as a material. So for instance, if you have a recyclable product, if you burn it, you take away its energy and utility. If you continue to use it, then you are continuing the energy within which it was derived from. Next, please. May I have a sip of water? Thank you. Now, some of these points were mentioned also earlier by Mr. Guzman. And the trend right now globally is that different countries who used to take up incinerators are now seeing their non-viability and their non-sustainability. For instance, there's the EU taxonomy, which excludes incineration because it undermines climate change mitigation objectives. In the USA, only one facility has been built since 1997. You also have 50 incinerators that have closed in the past 2 decades. A lot of it is because of the lack of finance required for upgrades. In Singapore, in one of the examples that were mentioned earlier, this quote here was from one of their recent sustainability reports. And their ministry was saying that incineration plants are very expensive to build and operate. They take up large areas of land. And they are also saying here that we cannot keep building more incineration plants indefinitely. In different countries like Sweden, Denmark, UK, Germany, Netherlands, mainland China, a lot of them are struggling with overinvestments in waste energy facilities and unused capacity. And because what ends up is they don't have enough waste to keep the facilities running, a lot of them end up importing waste from adjacent districts. Or in the cases, for example, of the UK actually exports waste to Malaysia. I think there was also the example in Indonesia. There was a video where there was a waste audit done in Indonesia in a landfill, and they discovered that a lot of these plastic products came from Australia, and they were meant to be burned over here. Next, please. So, with former, or let's say with other countries who were formerly very jubilant about incinerators now moving away from them, we are now seeing a move towards Asia as the new market for these tech fixes. Next, please. You'll see, for instance, primary proponents like Japan or China, with banks like the Asian Development Bank, or with, in China, there's the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, which are now looking at different countries in Southeast Asia to invest in these facilities. I think next you have a quick snapshot of, these are some new incinerator proposals for facilities that are currently currently being built in Asia. In Indonesia, you have around 17. Perhaps our partners from Waldi can validate that. In Malaysia, you have somewhere around 15. In Thailand, you have a whopping 79. I think they want to have at least one incinerator per state. And in the Philippines, what's interesting is that there has been a long-standing ban on any form of waste incineration since the early 2000s. And that ban is in danger of being lifted because of a move in Congress to approve to legitimize them. Next, please. These are pictures of protests from communities around incinerators. There's the one in Wuhan. And on the right over there is in Batuanang. I think we have some friends here who are working there in the Batuanang community. Next, please. This is we have 5 minutes. This is a brief run-through of some of the points that were made. And in our next slide, now Fräulein earlier mentioned, introduced the concept of zero waste. And in zero waste, what we are seeing here is, if you look at a hierarchy, a waste hierarchy, number 1 is rethinking and redesigning. So this involves, for instance, policy, like what with the EU is doing. It's large-scale systems-focused solutions building, followed by reduction, followed by reuse, followed by safe recycling, and at the very bottom is disposal. Zero waste also deems unacceptable toxic recycling, chemical recycling, plastics to fuel, incineration, and other false solutions. Now, this is how we imagine or conceptualize what circular economy means. Next, please. Our task here is not to find a better way to destroy materials, but to stop making products and packaging that have to be destroyed. Next, please. Zero waste in communities starts from source separation at the household level, is then towards decentralized collection to ensure that valuable materials are recovered and landfill-bound waste is reduced. Next, please. This is very much connected with the issue of plastics reduction, where we want to end the single-use, the production and single-use of disposable plastics. Plastics are very, very much connected with the petrochemical industry, with fossil fuels, and we hope that we can put an end and a stop to this in order then to make way for other solutions that work, for genuine solutions that work, such as zero waste. Next, please. Zero waste has a host of different benefits: green jobs, pollution reduction, and community health. In the next slide, there should be some figures over there. Now, this was in one of this publication mentioned that compared to other other forms of waste management, zero waste solutions can create up to 200 times as many jobs as landfills and as incineration. Through recycling, it can create 50 times as many jobs, and through remanufacturing, it can create up to 30 times as many jobs. All of these are really trying to harness as much energy as we can from materials and try to really extend their lifelines. Next, please. I'm not sure if this was the example that Frolan mentioned earlier. This is in the study of a zero waste city in the Philippines called San Fernando, where they achieved a 12% diversion rate in 2012. Along with that, you have the reduction of costs associated with waste by up to 58% by the city. So zero waste also results in savings for the city government. Now these are some examples that you can see and view and read about on the Gaia website. These are some case studies of zero waste cities. You have some there from the Philippines, in Penang in Malaysia, in Kerala in India, Bandung, Indonesia, Seoul, South Korea, and even in Kamikatsu, Japan. Now, Kamikatsu, Japan was interesting because they are a former incinerator site, and because they adopted zero waste, now they no longer use incinerators, and they achieved I think it was something like an 80% recycling rate compared to the only 20% recycling rate nationwide in Japan. Next, please. This is a list of policy recommendations. I think Yun Mei is telling me it's time. But these are different policy recommendations we have for governments. The second one is for international finance institutions, where we hope they will phase out, not just phase down, of financing for all technical assistance, grants, loans of incinerators, which are being promoted under the guise of being climate solutions. For the private sector, we hope that we can work together with the private sector towards redesign, reduction, repair, and working towards a just transition for many of the waste workers and waste pickers who are essentially contributing a very essential public service for everyone, which is waste management. I think that's our last slide. And thank you, everyone. I think a little bit later there's an open forum where I'd like to welcome some questions, comments, or even some stories from people. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much to Brex for giving us so many evidence-based examples to show that waste to energy incineration always receive protests from the community in Southeast Asia, in the Asia Pacific, and back in our hometown in Batu Arang. Thank you very much. And now next, we will have Dr. Jorge Emmanuel. Dr. Jorge Emmanuel is an adjunct professor of environmental and engineering in Siliman University, the Philippines. From 2003 to 2015, he was the chief technical advisor for global environmental projects of the United Nations Development Program in New York. As well as ministries of environment and ministries of health and environmental NGOs in over 40 countries. Throughout the 1990s, he was the lead consultant of the Electric Power Research Institute's project, evaluating dozens of advanced incineration and waste-to-energy technologies. In 2004, he was a member of the international expert group that developed the technical guideline of the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, dealing with incineration and other technologies that emit dioxins and other persistent organic pollutants. He is the author and co-author of about 24 technical guidelines of the United Nations and World Health Organization, and is the author of and co-author of 9 books and 5 book chapters. His book include United Nations Environment Programme, Compendium of Technologies for the Treatment of Biohazardous Waste. He received his doctorate in chemical engineering with a minor in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan, and holds additional degrees and certificates in chemistry from North Carolina State University, environmental management from the University of California at Berkeley, energy technologies from Stanford University, and public health from the University of Iowa. With that, we proudly invite Dr. Jorge, who is wired in from the Philippines, with us today. Thank you, Dr. Jorge. Hi. It's a full house here in Malaysia.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you first of all to the organizers and the sponsors of the symposium for inviting me in celebration of International Zero Waste Month with all of you. My presentation will focus on the toxic emissions from waste to energy incineration. Let's see, trying to, okay, there you go, like that. So can everybody see my slide? Is it okay?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, good. I would like to begin by showing you an example of a one type of a waste to energy design. This is a Stoker type waste to energy incinerator, also known as a Voodoo grade WTE incinerator. It is the most common WT design and has been around for 2 decades. I chose this specifically because this is the design that was selected, I understand, for a WT plant for Senegal. To help you understand how it works, let me begin by showing the main parts. On the left side is the waste charging system. Typically, this has a hanging crane which picks up, grabs the waste from the waste bunker and drops it into the hopper of the incinerator. This, shown in red, is the incinerator itself. Stoker incinerators have a series of grates that have holes underneath for the air. These grates are inclined at an angle and they move, causing the waste to drop downwards as it burns. The temperature in this section should be no less than 850 degrees centigrade. At the bottom of the incinerator is the ash collection system. It collects both the bottom ash, which is the ash that comes out from the bottom of the incinerator, and the fly ash. The fly ash is the ash that goes out with the hot gas. It has to be captured by the air pollution control system. The hot gases coming out of the incinerator first go to the energy generation system to produce steam, which is then used to turn the turbines, which then generate the electricity. The gas then goes to the air pollution control system. Now, the design of the air pollution control varies according to manufacturers. The example in this picture shows 5 air pollution control devices: ammonia, a quencher, an activated carbon lime injection system, a baghouse filter, and a catalytic reactor before the gas is finally allowed to go up the chimney. Now, the design proposed for the Tanjung Dua Bella WTE is similar to this, except it does not have a gas quencher and a catalytic reactor. Now, why is air pollution control important for a WTE? It is because, as mentioned by others, a WTE plant produces many toxic air pollutants. Here, I will only show a few examples, but take note of the health effects of some of these emissions. For example, ultrafine particles are associated with increased risk of heart attacks, lung disease, and brain tumors. Mercury and lead are toxic metals that affect the nervous system. Chromium is a toxic metal that can cause lung cancer and kidney and liver damage. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons are a class of chemicals that can cause various types of cancers, but the most toxic substance or group of substances released by the WTE are the dioxins, as mentioned by Brett. Dioxins are a short name given to a family of 210 chemicals, and these are the most toxic chemical pollutants known to science. They are created in a WTE incinerator. Now, why do we say that dioxins are the most toxic chemicals known to science? First of all, they are toxic at extremely small concentrations. For example, if you take just one drop of dioxins and you mix it up and dilute it in a medium-sized lake, you get a concentration of about 1 part per trillion. That concentration, that extremely low concentration, is enough to cause toxic effects in both humans and wildlife. So what are the known toxic effects of dioxins? First is cancer. Exposure to dioxins has been associated with soft tissue sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, one type of leukemia, different cancers of the throat and lungs, and prostate cancer. In addition, dioxins have been linked to reproductive harm in humans and animals. Examples are reduced sperm count and abnormal testicles in males, and ovarian dysfunction and endometriosis in females. Dioxins also affect the fetus and young children. Dioxins are linked to birth defects, including spina bifida, as shown by the two photos. Exposure to dioxins increases the risk of miscarriages among pregnant women, as well as effects on the development of children. Now, dioxins has a property called bioconcentration. It bioconcentrates up the food chain. Well, what does this mean? It means that dioxins increase in concentration as they accumulate in organisms. So if we measure 1 part per trillion of dioxins in a lake, when you actually measure the concentration of dioxins in the fish, that concentration could be 29,000 times higher than that in a lake, making the fish even more dangerous to eat. Now, where in the food chain do dioxins bioconcentrate? The most common way in which humans get dioxins is by eating eggs, milk, fish, and other dairy products. Now, you can breathe dioxins directly from a waste-to-energy incinerator, but because of this property of bioconcentration, the most common way for dioxins to enter the body in communities living around the waste-to-energy plant is by eating eggs, meat, fish, and milk. Another big problem with dioxins is that they remain in the environment for a very long time. So once a waste-to-energy plant begins operating and releasing dioxins, those dioxins will stay in the environment for for as long as 150 years if they're on the top of the soil, up to 500 years in water, and up to 1,000 years when they're covered by just a few centimeters, about 2 centimeters of soil. This means that many generations of people will be affected, not just the communities exposed today, but also their great-great-great-great-grandchildren. Now, here are a few examples of the health impacts of incinerators on the waste workers and on communities based on scientific studies of the last 20 years. There are many more, I just selected a few. Note the text that is shown in red. What I want to show here is that these health effects were found to extend way beyond the location of the incinerator. For example, the higher risk of cancer or excess cancer deaths can be found up to 5 kilometers away from the incinerator. Miscarriages among pregnant women up to 4 kilometers away. Birth defects up to 2 kilometers away, etc. What are the international standards for incinerators and dioxins? Malaysia signed the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants in 2002, but has not yet ratified it. The guidelines under the Stockholm Convention include the international standards for dioxins, developed in 2006. It limits the emissions in air to 0.1 nanograms per cubic meter. There is also a limit for wastewater. Note that the standard does not specify what air pollution control devices need to be included. It only says that one needs to use a combination of primary and secondary measures to keep the emissions below the set limit. So here are examples of primary measures. They include making sure the waste is burned at temperatures not lower than 850 degrees centigrade. Another primary measure is to expose the gases to temperatures from 850 to 950 degrees Celsius or higher for at least 2 seconds. Secondary measures are the air pollution control devices, such as the catalytic reactor, the quencher, the injection of activated carbon and lime for absorption. The bind-house filter, the cyclone, the electrostatic precipitator are examples of the pollution control devices that are used to remove particulates, which include fly ash in the gas. Standard also requires careful handling of the weight of the ash. This is because the ash is usually high in dioxins and also in toxic metals and other pollutants. The standard under the Stockholm Convention was developed in 2006. Only a few years later, the US already came out with more stringent dioxin limits for some of their incinerators. And today, various European countries require WTEs to meet dioxin limits that are 10 times more stringent, in other words, 10 times lower than the 2006 international standard, which many developing countries are still using. One of the problems of the 206 standard is how to test for dioxins. He says the testing is by periodic testing or by semi-continuous measurements. Periodic testing is much cheaper and has 2 steps. First, samples of the gas are taken from the chimney using the equipment shown in the left picture. The sampling costs several thousand US$ per sample. The second step is to analyze the sample in the laboratory using the equipment shown on the right, and that analysis costs about $1,000 US per analysis. As a chemist, when I was doing dioxin testing from incinerators in the US, this was the most expensive test, and they continue to be the most expensive test in analytical chemistry. The most common practice has been to do periodic testing, usually shortly of greenhouse gas. So they're saying our only chance then is
Thank you, Dr. Jorge. May I invite you to stay online because this section is open forum. And Mr. Brex, may I invite you to the desk together with Dr. Jorge. So this is a session. We'll have a full 20 minutes for every one of you to raise your concern or question for clarification to Dr. Jorge. And here I need to make a special announcement. In this symposium, we are offering Chinese interpretation for those who are more familiar with the Chinese language. If you need Chinese interpretation, can you raise your hand? We have an interpreter who is doing translation at the back. If you need interpretation, thank you. And also because we are live stream on Kini TV and also cross-posting on SAM, CAP, and also Gaia social media. So please, the one who are moderating these lines, you feel free to raise any concerns or questions that you receive from social media. Thank you. So with that, I open the floor. So with that, I open the floor to you.
The mic, please.
Yes, Mr. Kam.
Thank you very much for the panel specialists and for giving me an opportunity. Just give me a couple of minutes to raise my concern. Let me introduce myself. I'm actually a inhabitant of Batu Aram, Bukit Nanas, and my house is just about 1 kilometer away from the proposed site. So I'm very concerned about this. So I'm actually a eco promoter. I am a member of Chancellor Institute Marketing United Kingdom, and I am also a committee member of a pro-tem committee, Batu Aram, where anti-incinerator, and we have a mission just form up where we are going to save Batu Aram from the threat of incinerator. Now, threat including the safety, okay, the danger, and most of all, the very unique geographical structure of Batu Aram. A lot of you mentioned about dioxins, the danger to its health. Not much of you mentioning about the danger posed by the fleet of trucks. Hundreds of them going to run around the area, the danger. But my concern here is about the very unique structure of Batu Aram, geographical structures. I'm not a geologist, but I studied this for 30 years. Now, may I request the panel specialist, right, to come up with a research report, which I find a very difficult to find on the internet, about building incinerator on it beside mining land, where there are layers and layers of coal. My house, personally, beside another mining pond, mining lake rather, experienced a little bit coal fire, which basically engulfed my garden. Right? So this lake is connected to another open cast lake, just about half a kilometer away, and it's where they're going to build that incinerator. So I would appreciate that panel specialist here to be able to help us out, furnish a research report on the construction of WET incinerator on top of a ex-coal mine where there's a high level of fire risk. I came across a town in Pennsylvania, which is in your internet, that a town has been rendered inhabitable. And no visitors allowed to go in, where the whole town will actually on fire, right? That coal mine has been burning for about 11 years. And nobody's allowed to go in and come out. So I'm afraid that Batu Arang may face the same problem. So my request is, if the Penn is able to come up with a research report on building the incinerator on an ex-coal mine, that's my request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kao, from the community of Batu Arang, who is impacted by the proposal of SGEEP in Malaysia since last year. And now, Dr. Ho Hei, we have community members here from Batu Arang and Rawang who live within just right 500 meters from the proposed incinerator, also within 5 kilometer radius from the proposed incinerator, WT incinerator in Batu Arang. They are all here in our audience. So from what you have shared, and also this proposed incinerator is adjacent to an open cast coal mine within the active coal mine tunnel cave. Dr. Ho Hei and Mr. Brex, would you mind to share your experience and knowledge about what are the risks involved in terms of safety and public health that will happen to the communities who are in front of us, who live within 5 kilometer radius away? Thank you.
This is about 1 kilometer away. Just 1 kilometer.
The Mr. Kao who stood out and spoke to you, he just lived 1 kilometer away from the proposed WT incinerator. Thank you. Dr. Ho Hei, you want to go first, or Mr. Brex?
Sure. First of all, this is the first time I've heard of somebody building an incinerator on an old coal mining area. Usually, in the past, because in the past they used to work a lot of incineration, even designing incinerators, and there used to be a set of standards on how to site them. And I don't recall ever coming in a situation where incinerators were actually sited in a mine. So this is the reason maybe it's difficult to find research specific to that. But I think what we can focus on is we know what are some of the pollutants coming out of that incinerator. We know there'll be, once you build incinerators, there'll be a lot of trucks coming in and out. So it's valuable to look at the impacts, not just of the emissions as I've been speaking, but all the other environmental impacts, which includes the impacts of traffic and what it will do to the people. And now added this new concept of being near coal mine. Now, people near coal mines already have some elevated risks because of the coal mining. And so I think what's going to happen is with waste to energy, you'll be adding some additional major risks to the community. And so, for example, there are issues of heavy metals and say the leachate ponds, and now you're all of a sudden adding dioxins and other things going into the leachate pond, which makes it even more toxic. I think all of that needs to be taken into consideration. I really fear, personally, for people who live close to any waste-to-energy plant. And that example that Rex gave, what happened in Paris, was a waste-to-energy plant that had been in operation for quite a number of years, an old one. And now, people in Paris cannot, Paris, metropolitan Paris, not just Paris proper, are recommended not to eat the eggs from their farms or chickens and beef, etc., that are grown in the metropolitan area. So you can imagine what that is, especially since countries like ours do not have access to many of these expensive high-tech biomonitoring technologies and so on. So that's the reason why I think, as much as possible, we need to convince our government agencies around the world to rethink the move to waste to energy and to consider seriously the solution. As an engineer, as a scientist, I have to remind people that the solution is not a technology. The solution includes things like behavior change, like having systems in place, like community participation in sorting and segregating, but people don't make a lot of money for it. I'm sad to say that here in my country, the Philippines, I suspect a lot of money changes hands because these waste-to-energy incinerators being proposed left and right cost a lot of money, and so a lot of government officials, I suspect, are probably benefiting from it at great cost to the people who are going to live around it. So I hope I can support the people who are going to be affected by WT proposals.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jorge. Maybe Mr. Brex, you can share your experience as well.
Hello. Okay, I think with this, what I forgot, Mr. What Mr. Carl just talked to us about really illustrates what is happening in WT incinerator sites across the world. You would have the marginalization of this community. And the other point is that I actually question the EIA process, or the environmental impact assessment process, that got the proposal going in the first place. You mentioned it's a mining site. There's a lot of risks there. I think some few weeks ago in Batu Arang, there's something like an artificial lake with water.
Ex-mining lake.
Ex-mining lake.
With still layers of coal underneath.
With still lots of layers of coal underneath. I think the picture earlier that Dr. Jorge shared about the water, I actually fear that maybe that part is even more contaminated with the dioxins. So I think that's just a point I'd like to make to highlight to everyone that in many cases, there's always a question of how the environmental impact assessment is done. I wonder also if in your case there was any public information that was disclosed, if there was any transparency, or if perhaps the EIA was in a way just railroaded for approval. That's all.
Thank you very much for that question. May I invite the next audience to raise your concern? Yes, Mr. Hanan, the spokesperson for Jaringan Rawang Tola Incinerator.
I live in close to. Okay, we have to admit that Southeast Asian government in general are probably not very transparent. I use the word transparent in the kindest way. And transparency reduces from national level to state level to municipal level. And the decision-making process, the priorities may not be based on probably social or environmental impact. Other factors more important to the decision makers, such as economic, political, financial, business, given high priorities. I would like to ask Mr. Braxton, your experience in the Philippines in addressing these challenges. How can you help us based on your experience in the Philippines?
Hello. In the Philippines, as far as I know with the work with Gaia, it's really trying to, for instance, grapple with case studies. So, for example, it's getting the voices of community members, understanding what are their concerns. So that's one path that we're taking. Another is that by talking with these communities, we are able to understand better how to accompany them in relating to EIA matters. So, for instance, the science or the government authorities may say one thing, and the communities may say another. One of the things that we can do is perhaps tackle the EIA itself. So, for instance, in some instances, we ask for expert advice in giving their comments on the EIA. Now, this expert advice may be given to the government authorities, may be presented, for instance, in any panels or public discussions. But it is a challenge to gain information in the first place. I think it's quite a challenge. it really is very challenging, because even if you have the evidence to back it up, it's another thing to go through the politics of the situation.
And we may not be given opportunities to participate in the process, in the IA process.
I think Dr. Jorge was.
Yeah, Dr. Jorge would like to respond to Mr. Hanan.
I completely relate to Mr. Hanan's point, the lack of transparency. And I think what we have to do, among the things that I found helpful, is many times we have to work with investigative journalists, for example. That's something I've done. Working with investigative journalists who try to get information that's many times difficult for the average person to obtain. And many of them have the ways of doing it, investigative reporters. And I've worked together with some of them, even in my community, who have been able to get even technical documents which then allow you to explain to people what it really means. So that's one method to get around the lack of transparency. Another is to work with the government. I have found out that this is also useful, even in the United States. I have to protect my sources, but even in the United States, I used to have friends, former classmates, people I knew who were working with, say, the federal or state government, and even though they couldn't publicly expose something that was happening, they would quietly give me copies or some of my colleagues copies, and then we would expose it to media. And so sometimes there are allies in government who have consciences that cause them to share information that otherwise people wouldn't know. We also need to ally with waste workers, as we do in our community, because they are able to do things like take pictures and photographs in areas where people are not allowed. So it allows us to get as much information as possible. In some countries, there's something called a Freedom of Information request. And so if Malaysia has done, this is usually a procedure, a legal procedure where you demand copies of the reports which are supposed to be public documents but are not being released. And so hopefully this is yet another way to break through the global problem of a lack of transparency.
Thank you, Dr. Jorge. And now, from the Kini TV live stream on social medias, we received a few questions, and I will summarize them into two. So Dr. Jorge and Mr. Brex, audience online, Facebook, would like to understand the test on dioxin mainly conducted on chicken eggs. What about the cattle, the chickens, and the people? Can they inhale dioxin or be exposed to dioxin and develop toxicity in their body? And what kind of research the community can conduct to understand the risk of public health impacted on them? Number two, The questions about, as Malaysia is committed to COP28 last year, how COP28, the commitment of Malaysian government, will require the Malaysian government respond to the issue of plastic pollution and public health that may come from WT incineration and shift to promote zero waste as the approach for waste management. Thank you. So this is question, Dr. Jorge, would you like to respond to it? Thank you.
There are tests, there are methods that have been around for many years on testing dioxin, usually in the fatty tissue of humans. In breast milk, dioxins have been tested in many animals. The only problem is that they are very expensive tests because the dioxins are very small amounts. In other words, you need to be able to test them using equipment that can detect them at small amounts because it's at those small amounts where they begin to be dangerous. And so if there are any scientists in the room who are familiar, there are many testing methods on how to sample it from the body. And the test that's, the standard test that's done in the laboratory is called a high-resolution gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. Unfortunately, there's only a handful in the Philippines, and so many of the tests that we have to send to Japan, or the US, or Australia, and so on. So the test exists, the problem is they're very expensive. The test on eggs just happened to make use of a bioassay test that was newly developed, which has made it easier, but it's not as expensive as the others, but that's now sort of what's being used. And eggs are very simple to test as opposed to having to take samples from a person or an animal. On the public health issue, as you know, my background is also in public health. Doing these epidemiological studies are very difficult, very expensive, and they take many years. You see, we can do experimental tests on animals, and that's how we found out, not me, but other scientists found out what the effects of the dioxins are by testing it on rats, on mice, on monkeys, and so on. Of course, that's all, there are some concerns about that method of testing, but it's obvious that you cannot test humans. You cannot inject people with dioxins and see what it does to them. So instead, we have to use epidemiological tests, which take a lot of money and take a lot of resources. That's why it's, you can look at all the studies. In fact, you can look at some studies where they say we tested this area and we didn't see any effects of dioxins from the incinerator. And then you go back about 10 years later and all of a sudden, yes, there are high levels of soft tissue sarcoma now in the community. The other problem is because of what we call the latency period, which means even though the dioxins is released today or was released 5 years ago, you may actually not see the impact for another 7 years, 10 years, and to be able to prove conclusively or to have strong evidence that it came from the incinerator and from the dioxin, you have to have a lot of people who have died from these types of cancers, and this is the sad part. That's why I believe in the precautionary principle. If there's already strong evidence from around the world about this, we cannot wait for an incinerator to be put up and wait for the next 15 to 20 years for science to show us conclusively that these people died because of the incinerator, because so many people already died. This was the problem with cigarette smoking and all the studies of the past, right? Lastly, on COP28, yes, we have to do our best on climate change, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the different protocols, agreements that have come up. The sad thing is that there's also a strong limit, and that's because in the case of, say, climate change, as you know, in the last COP28, there were more representatives of the polymer, of the petrochemical and fossil fuel industry than there were the delegations from all the countries combined. And so they are able to put strong pressure, especially in the countries that rely heavily on fossil fuel, to put obstructions. But we still need to do our best. I also would like to get people, draw people's attention to what is now ongoing, and that is the Global Plastics Treaty. There's going to be the fourth inter-negotiating committee meeting in April in Canada, and I hope that delegations can go there to help, in effect, counteract the lobbying by the plastics industry and the fossil fuel industry, because almost all plastics come from fossil fuels, so they're there to try to protect, to keep plastics being built, and yet that's a major hindrance to us working on zero waste. So I hope many can join us to help pressure governments and the international community to have a strong plastics treaty.
Thank you, Dr. Jorge. Mr. Brett.
Hello. I'd just like to add on a little bit to what Dr. Jorge said about the link of plastics and fossil fuels. Noting that I think it's something around like 99% of all plastics is made with fossil fuels. So in a way, plastics equals fossil fuels. Now when it comes to incineration and incinerators, if you remember some of the graphs over there earlier in the presentation, a lot of the waste that is burned is always mixed waste. Some of that may be organic, a lot of that may be plastics. So just to add another point, another rationale, I guess, towards zero waste is that because zero waste, one of the priorities of zero waste is reduction. And also that's something that we hope we can achieve with the Global Plastics Treaty, is that we do not want to continue waste incinerators because that essentially locks us in to the status quo. It doesn't address the problem of plastic, which is just large volumes and reproduction of plastic. We want solutions that will not culture, but sort of train us as a culture, as different cultures, as different communities towards lifestyles that veer away from plastic use in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Brax. And now I would like to ask for the last question. If you have, Stromy, yes, or two.